Africa's integration test, borders, democracy, trade, and the premise of one Africa. What does Africa integration actually look like? Is it another summit, another agreement, another photograph of African leaders shaking hands? Or is integration something an ordinary African can actually experience, crossing the border without unnecessary delays, traveling through several African countries with one visa, moving food from one country with surplus to a country with shortages, holding peaceful elections, and trusting that government institutions will follow the law. Because over the past several days, developments from Saudi Africa to West Africa have given us a very interesting picture of where African integration stands today. SADC has approved an agreement establishing a regional tourism UNIVISA. ECOWAS has gone directly to Ghana and Togo border to talk with people who experience regional integration firsthand. South Africa and Zimbabwe are preparing for high-level bilateral talks. Nigeria is already talking about peaceful political competition ahead of 2027 presidential election. And in Zambia, President Hakainde Hichilema has won the single term, but the opposition is rejecting the result and preparing a legal challenge. So today we are going to connect all of these developments to one larger question. Is Africa building institutions strong enough to make continental integration work? And that question takes us directly to the African Union's integration agenda. Let's begin in Zambia. Zambians went to the polls on August 13, and President Hakainde Hichilema has won and secured his second term. His main challenger was opposition leader Brian Mundubile. Reported final figures show Hichilema receiving 2,965,326 votes compared to 1,856,217 votes for Mundubile. Hichilema therefore won the elections with roughly 60% of the votes, but the political story did not end there when the results were announced. Mundubile has rejected the presidential election results and says his party intends to challenge them through the court. He has alleged irregularity and called for scrutiny of the electoral process. This distinction is important. An opposition leader rejecting an election result is serious. But if the dispute moves through the court rather than into violence, into the street, then Zambia's democratic institutions will have the opportunity to resolve the disagreement constitutionally. And that is exactly where the African Union's role becomes important. The Joint African Union COMESA Election Observer Mission, which deployed 93 short-term observers from 27 countries, found that voting was conducted in a generally peaceful and orderly environment in 98.6% of the polling stations it visited. The observers also reported transparency during voting, counting, including the presence of party agents, observers, and media representatives. But AU COMESA observers did not say everything was perfect. They raised concerns about changes to electoral laws, political violence, restrictions affecting opposition campaigning, perceived impartiality in law enforcement, and application for laws affecting assembly and expression. They also noted that the Electoral Commission temporarily suspended counting and announcement of results on August 14 because of security concerns. The mission therefore urged political actors to remain calm and use Zambia's established legal and institutional mechanisms to resolve electoral disputes peacefully. That message becomes even more significant now that Mundubile says he intends to challenge the results. For the African Union, from the African integration perspective, this matters enormously. The African Union cannot build successful continental free trade area, common market, and eventually deeper political integration without confidence in African institutions. Integration requires trust. Citizens must trust electoral commissions. Opposition parties must trust courts enough to take disputes before judges instead of supporters taking disputes into the streets. Governments must accept scrutiny. And election observers must be willing to acknowledge both what worked and what needs improvement. Zambia now has an opportunity to demonstrate exactly that. Now let's move from democracy to the movement of people. At the 46th Ordinary SADC Summit here in Durban on August 17, Southern African leaders approved the agreement establishing SADC Tourism UNIVISA and called on member states to sign it. This could become one of the most visible examples of regional integration for ordinary travelers. Think about Europe and the Schengen system. One of the reasons European integration became tangible to ordinary people was that people could physically experience the reduction in borders or reduction of borders. Africa's circumstances are different, and SADC UNIVISA should not be confused with the borderless or school gain or star system. But the underlying principle is important, making movement easier. Imagine an international tourist arriving in Saudi Africa and being able to build one trip around multiple participating countries instead of navigating a completely separate visa process for every destination. That could encourage tourists to stay longer and spend money across several economies. Airlines benefit, hotels benefit, tourist operators benefit, restaurants benefit, taxi drivers benefit, local craft sellers benefit. The smaller and smaller tourism businesses can become part of the regional tourism economic instead of depending only on visitors to one country. But remember, approval of the agreement does not mean that a fully operational region-wide visa solely exists today. Member states still have to sign and implement the agreement. And that is where African integration repeatedly faced its greatest challenge. Africa does not necessarily suffer from the shortage of agreements. Africa often suffers from the implementation gap. At the same summit also addressed another form of movement, the movement of agricultural goods. SADC leaders called for the removal of non-tariff barriers, greater harmonization of standards, and improvement in cross-border logistics. They also addressed preparation for climate pressure, including early warning systems, irrigation, and drought-tolerant crops. This may sound technical, but consider what it means for an ordinary family. Suppose one SADC country has maize surplus, while another is experiencing shortages. Regional integration should make it easier to move that food across the border. But if trucks stay and sit for days at border crossings, if regulations are inconsistent, or if traders repeatedly encounter additional administrative barriers, then the food will technically exist within the region while customers elsewhere continue paying higher prices. That is why trade integration is not simply about eliminating tariffs. A free trade agreement is only as effective as the road, the railway, the port, custom systems, and border posts that allow goods to move. And that connects directly with African Continental Free Trade Area (AFTA). If Africa wants the AFTA to become transformative, regional communities such as SADC must make integration work at the practical level. And ECOWAS has just provided another example. On August 18, ECOWAS held a high-level dialogue and sensitivity exercise at the Mipo Akino John border post connecting Ghana and Togo. But what makes this interesting is who ECOWAS engaged. Not simply minister, not simply ambassador. The commission engaged border officials, cross-border traders, transporters, women, young people, and stakeholders from Ghana, Togo, and Benin. This is where integration needs to happen. You can write the strongest free movement protocol in the world, but if traders reaches the border and spend hours trying to understand procedures, that trader does not experience integration. If a truck carrying goods is repeatedly delayed, the business does not experience integration. If young entrepreneurs cannot easily reach customers in neighboring countries, they do not experience integration. So ECOWAS going directly to the border post matters because it puts policymakers face to face with the people who actually use the regional system. And that should be a model across Africa. Integration must be measured at the border, not simply at summits. Now, look at South Africa again. South Africa President Cyril Ramaphosa is scheduled to host Zimbabwe President Emerson Mnangagwa in Pretoria on August 21st for the fourth session of the South Africa Zimbabwe Bi-National Commission. At first glance, this is a bilateral diplomacy. Two countries talking to each other. But continental integration is built from the bottom up. From the bottom upward. Countries cooperate bilaterally. Regional economic communities connect those countries. And the African Union provides the continental framework. South Africa and Zimbabwe share important economic, transportation, and human links. What happens between these two countries affects trade corridors, migration, investment, and economic activity across Southern Africa. So bilateral cooperation should not be viewed as separate from African integration. When neighboring countries improve infrastructure links, trade agreements, and trade and border cooperation, they are helping build the foundation upon which SADC and eventually the wider continental market must operate. The African Union's integration project cannot succeed if neighboring states themselves cannot cooperate. And finally, let's move back to Africa, West Africa. Nigeria is already preparing politically for its 2027 presidential election. President Bola Tinubu, through Secretary to the Government of the Federation, George Akimi, has backed a peace accord signed ahead of the presidential campaign. The agreement is intended to encourage candidates and political parties to reject violence and respect electoral laws or rules. Nigeria matters enormously to African integration. It is one of Africa's largest economies, the continent's most popular country, and the central political and economic force within ECOWAS. When Nigeria is politically stable, West African integration has a stronger foundation. When Nigeria experiences serious instability, the effects can extend beyond its borders. And this is where Nigeria can learn from what we are seeing in Zambia. A peace accord is useful, but the real test comes when the competition becomes difficult. Will institutions be viewed as impartial? Will opposition parties have space to campaign? Will disputes be resolved peacefully? Will winners respect those who voted against them? Will the loser accept legitimate institutional processes? Those are the questions that every African democracy must confront. There is another development from Nigeria that appears separate or appears unrelated, but but actually belongs in this conversation. The chairperson, the EFCC chairperson, and the housing minister met with President Tinubu concerning the management and disposal of seized houses nationwide. Why include corruption and asset recovery in the discussion about African integration? Because you cannot separate economic integration from governance. If African wants the investors to move capital across borders, businesses need confidence in institutions. If government recovers stolen assets, citizens need confidence that those assets will not simply disappear again through another corrupt process. Transparency, accountability, and the rule of law are therefore economic infrastructure, just as much as highways and railways are. Now put these stories together, Zambia is testing whether electoral disagreement can be managed through institutions. SADC, that is SADC, is trying to make regional travel easier through Tourism UNIVISA. SADC is also trying to reduce barriers, preventing agricultural products from moving efficiently across borders. ECOWAS is encouraging or engaging directly with traders and officials who experience border integration every day. South Africa and Zimbabwe are strengthening bilateral cooperation that can contribute to wider continent and wider Southern Africa integration. And Nigeria is emphasizing peaceful electoral competition while also confronting questions of accountability in recovered assets. These may appear to be separate stories. They are not. They represent different pieces of the same African integration puzzle. The African Union vision of a more integrated continent cannot be achieved only through Addis Ababa. It requires ECOWAS. It requires SADC. It requires COMESA. It requires national governments. It requires credible electoral institutions. It requires efficient borders. And most importantly, it requires citizens who see actual benefits. Because the real measurement of African integration is not how many agreements governments sign. The measurement is whether a Ghanaian trader can cross into Togo more effectively or efficiently, whether tourists can visit several Southern African countries without unnecessary visa barriers, whether farmers can sell food across borders, whether young Africans can find opportunities beyond their national markets, whether opposition parties can challenge election results through court rather than violence, and whether governments can demonstrate that public resources and recover assets are being managed transparently. Folks, Africa already has many of the institutions required for deeper integration. The African Union provides the continental vision. The regional economic communities provide the regional building blocks. The AFTA provides the framework for a continental market. But the next phase of African integration must increasingly be about implementation, turning protocols into functioning borders, turning visa agreements into easier travel, turn agricultural commitments into trucks moving goods efficiently across countries, turn election observation recommendations into stronger democratic institutions, and turn regional cooperation into opportunities that ordinary Africans can actually see in their daily lives. Because ultimately, African integration will not succeed because leaders declare that Africa is integrated. It will succeed when Africans can feel that integration in the way they travel, trade, vote, work, and build businesses across this continent. And Zambia's post-election period may be one of the immediate tests. President Hakainde Hichilema has secured another term. Brian Mundubile rejects the outcome and says he will challenge it. Now Zambia's institutions must do their work, and Africa should be watching, because democracy, governance, trade, and free movement are not separate from Africa integration. They are the foundation upon which that integrated Africa must be built. Folks, my name is Pico Kawe. And if you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Share this video with somebody who may be interested in things happening in Africa. Until next time, have a great day. I will see you in the next episode.